Hello, my name is Derek Lee. I'm principal with PWL Partnership, Landscape Architects. I'm here with my colleague and partner, Grant Brumpton. And thank you so much for having us here. It's an amazing opportunity to be part of getting Londoners back to the river. We're not from here, so we took more than one trip to begin to learn more about this place. It's the people, it's about the river, the people, and the place. During our various site visits, we had experienced the robust riverfront park network and the Thames Valley Parkway, and grew to understand this project is about reconnecting as much as it is about re-envisioning. And so this is a scene of London, and one thing to really point out is you have an incredible resource already. It's a wonderfully pastoral, it's a wonderful green corridor, and it's really about working with what you have and thinking about what is the soul of London and how can it differentiate itself as a unique place. So it's really about fostering new connections between London's heritage, natural, cultural, human, is what is needed to aspire greatness and breathe new and sustained life into a river and its people. Our vision does this by opening the bank along the Thames. So we have a series of goals to go through with you. We mentioned the existing green network of parks and trails. Now let's consider it's really about the connections between not only the river but also the city network. And so we think about sort of the grid, the network of streets, the ability to sort of reach out and begin to connect the city to the river in ways that we haven't been able to realize here. And that is extending the grid, and so we talk about this idea of the gray and green infrastructures. In this light, the gray and green infrastructures must work together to extend the grid. The green grid outward into the city, and the gray grid back down the banks of the Thames. And it's very much like lungs, and so for over 30 years, the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority has been carrying out its very important work of keeping people and the property safe from major flooding events within the river corridor. This work has created a healthy riparian zone and a blank slate which we intend to use to let the river breathe and to create new places for recreation and discovery. So it is like a pair of healthy lungs. Their functionality can only be realized if they are free to expand and contract. Letting the Thames breathe while creating new pockets of amenities for its people is the second of the two goals our concept aims to achieve. In terms of strategies, we looked at a series of sections to begin to kind of illustrate the concept of what we have before you. Before it was the Thames, this river was known by the First Peoples as the Askunasipi, or the Antlered River. Our first strategy was to open the bank to create a series of inlets at strategic points along the river to help extend the green grid into the city and the gray grid back to the river. Like the points of antlers, these inlets help to build these necessary physical connections. And to help the river breathe, we propose a simple grading exercise to begin to transform the floodplain into a connected series of oxbow wetlands and modest ridges to help manage swell flows, treat stormwater runoff from the city, and create vantage points and meanders for a secondary trail network. And so what we began to think about is, in terms of transects along the river's edge, how this idea of the antlered river could work. And so it is so much about bringing the river to the city in many different forms. You can see here the idea of creating slips in this location to facilitate marine access, both for boats, for urban ecology. We'll get into that in a second. And also the idea of these oxbow wetlands, being able to sort of do some cutting and filling and sculpting the foreshore of the land, of the park space, to create these areas that could not only facilitate human experience in more meaningful ways, but also provide habitat creation as well. And you can begin to see in the lower slide how the flood conditions at the 100-year and the 250-year flood levels can begin to be quite transformative in how we begin to experience the site. What this diagram also shows is the idea of extending the street grid to the water, and the idea of creating a series of frames that we'll talk about soon. But the idea of being able to frame the view of the river and frame the experience of the river becomes a very important consideration in this. So really, to summarize, it's about opening the bank by extending the grid and letting the river breathe with antlered inlets and flood parks. So this plan illustrates a 20-year vision for the entire corridor. And we begin to think about how we can work with the river, letting it breathe, and working with that morphology of that meandering floodplain in ways that we can begin to kind of look at our existing park resources here and sculpt them to allow that river to change its course over time. When it floods, certain landforms are revealed or concealed. And it's about bringing not only people back to the river, but bringing sort of the ecological processes that have been ignored back into full fruition. And so I won't get into the details of the places, but as you can see here, I think what this begins to convey at this scale is kind of the revealing that morphology of the river through the existing park network. So we'll get into sort of the focus area of the forks. And this plan blow-up shows sort of the 20-year vision for the Forks study site. And you can see Harris Park. I'm not sure how to do this. Oh, I'm sorry. Go back to this full window here. Sorry about that. What we begin to look at is how the park itself begins to manifest that notion of the meandering river. But also, when we begin to look at the focus site, which is sort of the Dundas Street corridor, we wanted to build off of sort of the previous thinking, the downtown planning that's been in place for over the last months and years, and begin to think about, well, how can we work with this framework? And as you can see in this image, we looked at Kensington Street Bridge, working with the assumption that it would be a pedestrian corridor, possibly handling light rail, and thinking about, well, if we do kind of extend Dundas down, what could it be as a place beyond that? And so what we propose to do is that, south of or west of Rideau, we want to pedestrianize that space. We want to create an experience that focuses on bringing the river to the city vis-a-vis a series of rain gardens, water features, and also wanting to reveal the river by allowing people to terrace down and touch it. So the Forks becomes a very pivotal point in that regard. We also begin to think about extending the grid both west of the river, the neighborhoods there, and on the east side, the fingers coming through into Harris Park, and understanding that there's a profile in which that touches down and links with these proposed blue slipways that we're allowing the river to sort of move in. The intent overall is to maintain the programming opportunity